Welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast, where we're currently in a series of 7 podcasts talking about our new book, Bigger Isn't Better, Better is Better, Avoiding the Pressure for Endless Growth to Build a Better Business and Life. Today I'm joined by Andreas and Richard from Evolution Partners. How are you today, chaps?
Very good. Thanks for having us again.
It's a beautiful day in Sydney. Good to be here.
Good to have you both. We are hopefully getting a little bit into the flow, and we were just talking about off air. The first episode, or the first in this series, we were a little bit clunkier, and hopefully now we can have a little bit more interesting and easily flowing questions. So let's do that. Maybe I'm going to start today. We're talking about better customers, and customers is an interesting one because they're essential. For some people, customers are all that matters when it comes to strategy, particularly in sales teams. We'll say to them, what's your strategy? And they'll say, well, we've got to have good relationships. And that's the extent of what they say. And it's interesting to now for us to say, well, that isn't strategy. That's an essential part of the sales function. But it's interesting for us to now come back and talk about better customers as being so essential in, I guess, a book that's about compounding and strategy and differentiation against corporations. So let's kick off with maybe a word or two. When you're thinking about better customers in your experience, what comes to mind?
I guess my word would be irreplaceability.
Irreplaceability. Okay. Nice. Do you want to expand on that at all?
Absolutely. Without spoiling too much of what we're going to be discussing today, how can we make ourselves, our owner-led companies, irreplaceable to our customers so they will even fight to work with us?
Interesting. And Richard?
Well, I need 2, so I'm going to go with added value. And the reason for that is it sort of builds off what Andreas is saying, is that we've got to get beyond just the trust that we want to engender between us and them, but we want to make sure that they really feel like we're adding value to their lives, to their outcomes, to who they are as a customer of our company. Are we adding value? And I think that's a big test.
Awesome. The beginning of this chapter, Better Customers, starts with a quote from Bo Burlingham on this podcast where he said, profit is the applause of your customers. And it's a really insightful and interesting statement, because what he's saying there is you will gain profit if your customers applause. And I feel it's a really interesting way to look at it. So let's jump in. I think we're going to start with Snapper. Lawnmowers, believe it or not.
Lawnmowers. So I was really looking forward to this chapter, because this and what comes next in our next one in the series about offerings, I feel like these are just 2 of the big chapters in some ways. But I love this story, so let me ask you the question. So we opened up the chapter with a discussion around a story about lawnmowers and Walmart, and the conscious decision that a CEO made to walk away from profit. Do you want to talk about that, Brad?
Yeah. So my daughter loves Shark Tank, the TV series Shark Tank, predominantly the US version, where you have a panel of judges. I think in England or Canada, it's called the Dragon's Den. But there's a panel of successful entrepreneurs, and people come in and pitch. Now, one of the things that is really appealing for businesses that sell products is to get into Walmart. And so that was a bit of my thinking behind why the story was so valuable, because for many entrepreneurs, to get a deal with Walmart in Shark Tank would be the holy grail. That means that they've made it, they've cracked it. So to go against that and to have a story that's interesting about that is quite interesting, I guess, to repeat the word interesting. And the reason is that if you're going to walk away from Walmart, they'd better be pretty dire, right? Because if that's what we want scale. And it speaks about Jim Weir, who's the CEO of Snapper Lawnmowers, is going to meet with the senior vice president at Walmart. And he's heading in there. Now, the senior vice president, after their third year of transacting, is very interested to continue to grow the relationship with Snapper and wants to go into more outlets and do more things. But on the other hand, Jim Weir's going in with a completely different agenda because Jim's thinking, this isn't working for me. And what he says, and this is from a book about Walmart, the Walmart story, he's thinking to himself, well, I can't make this work. 20% of his business was with Walmart and 80% was with the independent dealer channel. Every year over the 3 years, what was happening is that Walmart were asking for more scale, bigger, but they wanted it at a reduced price. What that meant is that ultimately Jim couldn't make a profit from that 20% of his business, and it was only going to get worse. But also what's really interesting is that the dealer channel were very unhappy that people could go in and buy the same lawnmower they could buy from the independent business at Walmart, but they could buy it from Walmart at a cheaper price. So Jim had to make a decision. Do I protect the 80% of my business, or do I apply pressure onto my business for less profit and try to go for scale? Now, when he said no, the Walmart vice president's answer was that he wanted them to perhaps consider a cheaper imported lawnmower to reduce the quality of their offering, or to build a lawnmower that was cheaper specifically for Walmart that couldn't be bought anywhere else. So yeah, it's a really interesting story about the mindset of better customers.
So you brought up an interesting thing there, where it was this word transact that really sort of jumps out at you when you talk about it, but also when you read about the book. And you talk about this idea that corporations are designed to transact, but then when owner-led businesses copy that, they lose their soul. And I think that's a really good thing for us to sort of unpack for our listeners, is to understand how transactional behaviors lose the essence, that the sort of je ne sais quoi, the why is this so important for an owner-led business. So perhaps you could expand on that?
Yeah. One of the things that we're endeavoring to do is to try to build in a strategic playbook within this for owner-led companies. So what's written between the lines is really the strategic playbook, or a mindset of strategic thinking as to how do you compete against a corporation, or even perhaps deal with a corporation. But a corporation, to your point, Richard, is designed to transact. A corporation is really about a system that no one controls. And that's why in episode 1 of this series, we're talking about what is the difference between an owner-led company and a corporation. Well, corporations are excellent at many things, but they can't be excellent at everything. And the way that they are designed is to protect the corporation. And again, whilst we think, oh, the CEO of a corporation controls it, really the system is what controls it. And the CEO is one part in that big jigsaw of a corporation. And so when we are talking about customers being treated by a corporation, corporations treat customers transactionally. The people there can have relationships, but the corporation can't really have a relationship. And because it's simply a system. And so we can find an opportunity in there. But also, the more that owner-led companies learn from what works at corporations and they try to emulate corporations, the more that owner-led companies can lose their soul. Now, every single circumstance of that may not be true. Okay, so I talk about, as an example, Steve Jobs was running Apple, but it was still, in a sense, being run like an owner-led corporation. It still had the soul, and a lot of the soul, and there's a case to be made that now, as Apple continues to move on, it's losing some of its soul and becoming more like a corporation. And this is what Paul Graham, the Silicon Valley investor, might call founder mode in his world. But we're really talking about, there is something very special about the soul of an owner-led company that means that rather than transacting, we can build true advocacy.
That's interesting. It makes me think one of our clients, they probably 3 years ago, they had this split between customers, let's say 50-50, between private and commercial. And I prompt the question, so which one is the biggest portion, or the portion that will give us the best, perhaps, future? And they all said commercial. That's it. And then the more we started to talk about it, the more we started to work on all of the elements that we usually work with clients, they realized that it was about the scale. Those commercial were the Walmart of their story. And we started to shift all our effort into the private, that for them nowadays, they will say, I can't believe that I was running my company with those commercial Walmart customers, which actually felt that level of transact, right? That you were describing, Brad, in their relationship.
Yeah, over 8,000 years, when humans have been interacting, business has been built on trust and loyalty. That's how people established and maintained businesses, because 8,000 years ago, people were still interacting and trading, right? But it was all built on that. And that deeply connects with who we are as people. And that's why we get frustrated when we deal with a corporation that treats us like a transaction and not like a person.
Mm.
Yeah, because it starts to erode that transactional behavior. I think starts to erode culture. It gets away from, why did you start this business in the first place? If it's all in the pursuit of the next transaction, I think you get to a point where you start to think about everything is about just getting that transaction done, rather than, I started with my words of added value. Like, it's that idea of, there's got to be a better meaning or a bigger meaning to why you're doing business than just, I must do more transactions. But I think that's at the heart of why, we've used this phrase sort of, drift, has come up a number of times in the previous episodes. But why is it that customers, then, building on those ideas, why do they naturally drift towards indifference then?
So the concept of drift we spoke about in an earlier episode, and I'll just quickly recap that. Teams drift towards toxicity. Customers drift towards indifference. Offerings drift towards mediocrity. And financials drift towards unprofitability. So coming back to customers drift towards indifference, what might be considered around that is that if we are enamored with bigger, if we are chasing bigger at all costs, and especially if we're emulating a corporation rather than being true to our owner-led company and the opportunity that lies there, if we're enamored with the next transaction, then customers can come in and they can get a mediocre offering, perhaps. They can get a good or an average offering, but we're not really focused on engaging or exciting them as much as we could. And the reason is that because we're focused on bigger, once we've got that transaction, we're focused on the next transaction and then the next transaction. So if we keep chasing new customers over servicing existing ones and focusing on how do we service our existing customers better, we can fail to exceed their expectations. So exceeding expectations comes at a cost for some people, perhaps. And you can think, well, am I going to give all the profit in the deal back to the customer by exceeding their expectations? Well, no, that's not what we're saying at all. What we're saying is understand the cost of transacting and the cost of focusing on bigger and what it does to the customers. And that has actually got its own cost to bear.
Yeah, I think it reminds me, I was talking with a client recently when they were talking about their renewal season. And the renewal season is, roughly in the early part of the calendar year. And they're a subscription business, but they have to go through a renewal. And when I was talking to one of their leaders, they started talking about, well, we need to predict, renewal. We need to understand how to mathematically do that and then come up with a renewal rate, and we need to hit this number. And I sort of asked them the question. I said, okay, so then after that's done, what happens on the customer journey after they renew? What do you do? Well, we move on to the next one because we've got to get all these renewals done. And it was this pursuit of each transaction was clouding so many things they were missing, like, why do people renew? Who are the better renewals? Are all renewals created equal? Should you be doing things earlier than the early part of the calendar year to ensure this? But they were looking at it as just a one and done type sort of experience for them. And you can imagine the customer's reaction to that is, well, I just, I'm going to get the renewal notice and then they're going to put the pressure on me and then I won't hear from them. And it kind of introduces this idea in my mind of there's a tax on loyalty. There's a tax on being a customer, an existing customer. And you brought up this idea that, well, we shouldn't reinvest all of our profit into these customers because that erodes a profit. My argument is if you don't and they don't renew, what's the bigger loss? A little bit of more added value or a complete loss of a renewal? And it's that opening up the aperture, I think, which is important in this conversation. And that's why that indifference starts to happen, because people realize they're just a transaction. They're not a meaningful relationship.
And that's the key word, is transaction.
Yeah.
Andreas?
Yeah, I would just, you hit that nail, Richard. You spoke about loyalty, and I cannot help but think in the book, Brad, you mentioned loyalty a few times, but then you say trust, loyalty, and then advocacy. And I want to read it so I don't get this wrong. You say trust means I believe you can do it, from a customer to a brand. Loyalty means I believe you must do it. And advocacy means, well, I will tell others. So why does so many companies that never reach that top level of advocacy, perhaps that we're describing here?
So the word advocacy is what we're encouraging owner-led companies to aim for. And advocacy comes from the Latin word advocare, which means I will speak on behalf of, and it actually also comes from the law. So in a court setting, someone would speak on behalf of another person. They would advocate for them. And so then we take that back to better customers as a concept. And would your customers speak on behalf of you, or hopefully speak positively on behalf of you? Well, what does it take to speak on behalf of another person? Well, you've got to trust them and you've got to be loyal to them. Now, I might trust that Amazon will deliver. I can go to the Amazon website and I will look at an item that I'd like to buy, and I believe that it's there, or I trust that it's there, and I trust that if I click buy, that it will get to me roughly on the date that they say. I have great trust in that system because Amazon is a corporation, it's a system. But I'm not loyal to them because Amazon transacts. Because if I can find that same item somewhere else, I might go and buy it if it's going to be faster, better, cheaper, whatever it is. Loyalty, on the other hand, is different. Now, you might have a soldier who is loyal to the army, but they might not trust the army. They will go out and literally put their life on the line for that army, but they may not trust that the army will do the right thing by them. They may have, in fact, a great mistrust of the army, but they're still loyal to the army and the nation. So trust and loyalty are different things. But when we get trust and loyalty, it means that customers believe that you can deliver and that you must deliver. So it is the loyalty that is the must. They believe that you must do what you say that you will. So most companies really, if they build a loyalty program, they will do it for their own reasons, but you can't manufacture advocacy. Advocacy happens when trust and loyalty are present.
Yeah, it reminds me, I spent about 15 years building loyalty programs, designing them, building them, operating them in a previous life. And I always remember when I was talking to a new potential client, they would always say, so who's got the best loyalty program? And this is a reference particularly couched when I was living in Canada. But I would say to them, I think some of the best loyalty programs come to mind in the shape form of Aldi. And they'd say, well, but Aldi doesn't have a loyalty program. I said, that's the point, because you can walk into an Aldi and they consistently do 100 things really, really well to get you to shop around the center aisle, then go down that center aisle. There's going to be great amounts of stock. There's going to be a sharp price, not a great price, but a sharp price on things that they've managed to curate. You can walk into another store and it will look exactly the same. You'll get treated exactly the same. Like, all of these things are playing around with trust and loyalty. And another riff I used to have on this was this idea that too many loyalty programs think about buying loyalty and it's all about the reward. And I would say, no, 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 no. It's all about the recognition, because the combination of recognition and reward in a loyalty program moves it back to this world where you're balancing trust and loyalty towards an outcome of advocacy. But it was very hard for a lot of big corporations to get their head around it. Well, we just need to siphon off 0.05%, and that will be the cost of the point, and then we'll buy the loyalty and we'll give lots of put. But then they would turn around and go, my customers are so promiscuous. They're doing business with all my competitors. Well, because they were shopping for those transactions, because they'd been taught and educated that that was all that was important to that given company. And it was the very few companies that spent their time trying to figure out this balance of trust and loyalty. And when they did, then they did amazing things. And I think that's, too often people say, oh, I need a loyalty program. I'm like, no, no, no. You need a customer program. You need a customer journey that makes sense. You need to do things amazingly well across that journey, not just throw some points to somebody and hope that they will be loyal to you, because they still don't trust you, because it's such an easy thing. And we see this every day with loyalty programs in Australia. You want to expand on that a little bit? Because I know you touch on this in the book, Brad.
What is the purpose of a customer loyalty program might be a good starting point. It is to build customer loyalty, one would think. It is to get customers to spend more with the aforementioned company. And it might be true and it might work much of or most of the time. But a customer understands, even if it's subconsciously, that a corporation is designed to transact, and corporations can't help but become transactional. And that's what we're seeing with many of the airlines and changes that they're always trying to tweak to their frequent flyer programs. It's always like, well, there's no seats. I mean, we just went through, 5 years or something where you could barely find a seat to redeem your loyalty points for love nor money. Now, that might not be true of every single airline, but customers understand that the relationship they have with corporations is that of one where you transact. And what we're really advocating with better customers is understand that and then work against that, work to build a better relationship and advocate an advocacy type relationship where trust and loyalty are present. And it doesn't mean that you need a loyalty program or you don't need one. It is simply saying that if you are an owner-led company that is operating authentically without a corporate machine, you can do this with human connection. You can exceed expectations. You can put customers or treat customers as humans.
Absolutely.
And also, Brad, in the book, you mentioned when we talk about advocacy, we talk about customers, you sort of divide them into 4 groups. If we were to think about a 2x2, where we have loyalty in one axis and trust in the other axis, then you divide customers into those who are genuine advocates, those who are practical buyers, those who are transactional dealers, and those who are committed skeptics. So probably my question is, how should owners use this framework or categorization to deal with their customers and to reflect perhaps on how they're dealing with their customers?
Yeah, so if we think about advocacy, advocacy as being the goal, and we think that advocacy comes from trust and loyalty, as we spoke about, what does it look like when we've got people who've got high or low trust or high or low loyalty? And that's what we're really doing in this is we're saying, yeah, there are 4 different types of people. So maybe I'll just walk us through those quickly. So first of all, we've got transactional dealers, low trust and low loyalty. As soon as they find another better price, they're gone. They're going to do that. For many years, when we're working with customers on strategy, I've said to leadership teams, great strategy is one that annoys the tenders department. Now, some people get it, and some people are like, why would you possibly want to annoy the tenders department? Now, the answer is that, well, your core customer is not inside the tenders department. They're a transactional beast that is designed to interface the corporation with the outside world. Okay? But if you are doing such a good job that your core customer inside the corporation is saying, I don't care what your tenders say. I want to get this company to do this work. It's going to annoy and frustrate the tenders department who are purely transactional. Now, a transactional dealer is an example of a tenders department, or that's an example there. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't deal with them, but we've got to understand we've got a lot of work to do. So the second is practical buyers. They trust you, but they're shopping around. They believe that you can deliver what you're going to do, but equally, they're like going to look to any other offer that can do it a little bit cheaper, or there's something else. They're always shopping around. Next is the committed skeptics. So these people are low in trust, but high in loyalty. They're stuck with you via their habit or their laziness, or basically there's no other choice in the market. But they don't really trust you, and they can't become an advocate, and you can't build advocacy from them. And then finally, genuine advocates, again, high trust and high loyalty. They believe in you and they compound the value with you. So they spend more, they provide more referrals, and they're harder to lose when you make a mistake. And so we really think, where do each of our customers, or the majority of our revenue pool, where do our main customers and segments sit across those four areas?
And I think at the simplest level, it's this idea that matrix or that categorization kind of brings to life an interesting question that you pose in the book, right? So if we're up in that top right corner and we're in that sort of genuine advocate space, you said that, these people would potentially annoy their procurement department, but you posed this great question, which was, would your customers fight to keep working with you? And I think that just crystallizes a lot of what we're talking about in this chapter. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah. Well, in the Better Teams section, we spoke about our team members, and is it easy to quit, or is it hard to quit if we find the right kind of person in an owner-led company? Here, we're talking about customers. Now, if you went to your customers and said, look, we've had a change of heart and we don't want to work with you anymore, how many of your customers would say, okay, see you later, have a good life? And how many of them would try to fight to keep working with you? Well, it's may on the surface, especially for a corporation, seem preposterous. But this is the kind of relationship that the best companies can have, and certainly better companies can have. So if we build advocacy, it's the kind of relationship that customers will fight to keep. They trust you're going to deliver what they need, and they're loyal, and so they're coming back and back and back. So if we think about expectations, so are you meeting the customer's expectations? Let's just assume that the base, you're meeting the expectations. If you're meeting their expectations, it can be easy to substitute. I expect this of you, you're delivering this, that's great, let's move on. But they don't hate you, they don't love you, but they don't really care as much either. And when you're just meeting their expectations, well, that's one of the ways that it becomes easy for customers to drift towards indifference. But when you're exceeding expectations, it can be hard to substitute, because customers feel like they're emotionally tied and they don't really want to lose that emotional tie. Yes, there is 1,000 or 100 little things that you would need to do to get there, but if you're exceeding the customer's expectations, you can get that advocacy level to occur. And then we think, okay, if corporations dealing transactionally, we can look towards advocacy, and that can be strategically different from those corporates.
One of the companies that I'm working with, we've been working together for more than 5 years, and the work that they've been doing on a few of their customers, they got to a point where there was a tender, where there wasn't a tender before. And of course, the criteria was, can we get it cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, as you described, Brad and Richard. And the point was that the real users of those services started to complain to the management, hey, we see the risk of losing this value. We don't want to risk it. We don't care about your tendering process, corporation, on this side. We're using the service. We want them. And it was such an important fight to sit out on the outside that at the end, the tendering, it didn't go through because they actually won. I think they kept on working with their customer. It's just because the internal pressure. That's the fight. And it was just an amazing thing to see. You imagine that you multiply that by many of the customers and you get a lifetime value of that customer, which is insane. So it made me wonder when I saw that, and of course, in this conversation, there is an example in the book, Brad, about lifetime value. And there's a lifetime value of $6,000, for example, versus a lifetime value of $15,000. And all the same, keeping the customer acquisition cost at $2,500. So can you explain how advocacy that we've been discussing already and retention that we've been discussing already make the difference, and why it makes perhaps marketing spend even compound?
Yeah, so a bit to unpack there. And with our listeners not having a calculator, I'm going to just try to make it as simple as possible. Imagine you've got a customer and they spend $2,000 a year each year and they stay for 3 years. So they've spent $6,000 over their lifetime with you. Now, if you build, and you do the 100 little things, can you take that to 6 years and double the lifetime of that customer? Well, then that then we get another 3 years. But also, if we can build it from 2000 to 2005, we get it to $15,000. So we're getting them to spend a little bit more each year from 2000 to 2500, and we're extending it by 3 years. Now, we go back to the mindset of bigger. And if the mindset of bigger is, let's get more customers to come in because I want to get bigger for bigger's sake. I want growth for growth's sake. All you're focused on doing is bringing in the next customer. But if you're focused on better, then what you're doing is focusing on better customers and improving the long-term value of the customer, how much they spend each year and how long they spend it for. So that improves that. But also, you don't need to spend marketing and sales money to acquire that customer a second time. So you've spent, let's imagine, $2,500, get that customer in the first place. Well, you don't need to go and spend that. That's called the customer acquisition cost, or CAC. That works in that sense. So it really does compound if you can build advocacy and build these customers to be better over.
Yeah. So this idea of lifetime value reminds me of just a program I built. I was working with a telecoms business, and they were an acquisition machine. They were a corporation, but the problem was that their lifetime value was 7 months, calculated over 7 months, because they would bring on customers for long distance plans, calling anywhere in the world, and then somebody else would come along with a better price, and the customer would leave and go on. And so we turned that problem on its head, and we said, okay, so the goal is not more customers. The goal is lengthening the relationship. How do we do that? And one of the things that we realized was that we always offered the best plans to the new customers, but existing customers sat on these expensive, out-of-date plans and never got any real focus. And so what we ended up doing was creating a small team whose entire job was to reach out to these folks through multiple different methods and basically proactively right-size them onto the best and the most effective plan for that person. Lifetime value went out to about 11 months. But in the context of that business, even though they were a bit of a corporation, this was a breakthrough because it changed the mindset internally. And I think, whilst that was good for that scenario, if you take that to an owner-led company, that idea that your best customers shouldn't be paying a loyalty tax to do business with you, turning that on its head and say, how do we invest more? How do we exceed expectations? I think is that breakthrough that we need in thinking to create these better customers for the long term. But, I tell that story just because I think it also sets up the next question, which is, how do we, I guess, how do we start to see this situation start to arise in owner-led companies, Brad, where what are those sort of weird doom loop steps? We've introduced this idea of the anti-flywheel, the negative flywheel in previous episodes, but do you want to talk about what the customer doom loop looks like?
Yeah. So in each of the chapters in the book, we've got a flywheel and a doom loop. And the flywheel talks about compounding, and obviously that's what we're endeavoring to do through those areas. Whereas the doom loop talks about what is the trap that those owner-led companies that are focused on bigger rather than better fall into. So for the bigger customers doom loop, it starts with the mindset of bigger is better. And it starts with entrepreneur and an impulsive risk taker who is targeting new customer growth. That is our absolute and primary focus. Now, when we acquire a new customer, what happens? It becomes someone else's problem in the organization, because then we've got to get the next one and then the next one and then the next one. But that means that if we do that, we meet but don't exceed customer expectations. Begins the process of the doom loop, because as soon as we win them, we pass them on to sales or operations, and they just kind of fall into the business and we deal with them. But we're not really focused on building better customers. We're focused on new customers. If we do that, we meet but don't exceed customer expectations, we can't help but build transactional relationships with those customers. And so we think that we're then easy to substitute. Going back to our conversation earlier, if we build transactional relationships with customers, we can't help but have low long-term value per customer. Think about the customer who was spending $2,000. We extended that out from a couple of years to 4 years or whatever it was. Well, that's what can happen. We have these low LTV per customer. If we do that, we can't help but have minimal profit per fixed cost, requiring additional investment to grow. And so we then can't help but target new customer growth, because we think because of this minimal profit per fixed cost, we need to target new customer growth. And the bigger mindset kicks back in, and then the flywheel moves on to its second spin. So overall, each customer is spending less with a lower long-term value for each customer. So you've got to spend more to acquire more customers.
And I guess probably people want to know, so how does the better customers flywheel, the opposite, right? That flip, and how that this flip actually creates compounding momentum. And probably why, just to add a second question, why this flip, this compounding momentum of the better customers flywheel restores not only profit, but the soul of the business.
Yeah, so if we've got genuine advocates that are hard to substitute, going back to our earlier conversation, it begins by focusing on expanding value for existing customers. So how do we add more value for existing customers so that they stay longer? Well, if we do that, we can't help but if we do it correctly, meet and exceed customers' expectations. If we do that, we can't help but build loyal relationships with customers who refer others. That's the objective. We increase then our long-term value per customer, per the example that we provided earlier. And then we can't help but grow our profit per fixed cost to fuel reinvestment. Then if we do that, we can't help but focus more on expanding value for existing customers. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't grow, and that's a really important part of this book, right? This is about building a better business, and it's really about a mindset of better and compounding. And so what's happening is that each of our customers are growing, they're referring more people, or they're growing their LTV, they're referring more people, we're serving them better, and then that's our growth wheel. So overall, each customer is spending more with a higher long-term value, and it gives us more profit to be able to reinvest to continue to acquire customers.
Yeah, I think that, the key lesson coming out of this is that folks, as they listen along to this, is that it's a series of steps, right? Like building better customers is not just doing one thing, it's building a set of small things. It reminds me, I wanted to say this earlier, but we were lucky enough to have dinner together recently in WA, and we went to a restaurant this restaurant could have been any sort of Asian fusion restaurant on the planet, and it would probably be quite predictable. But from the moment you walked in, it was designed to do 100 things really, really well. Every single detail had been considered, every single element of the menu, of the way the menu was presented, the way the tables were set up, the way the ambiance was in the restaurant, the way that the kitchen was accessible and visible. I sat there having dinner with you guys, and I remember it was all these little things that were just compounding. And I went away from that knowing that I don't live in WA, but if I was ever back there, I'd go there. But when I came back from that experience, I think I told 15 or 20 people I had one meal that sort of was kind of like a life-changing experience because it was just so good. It was all of these compounding steps.
It made, and that was very intentional that we went there, and it made you eat slower, and it made you appreciate every single little bit of it. It was Japanese, I will just point out, and it was really around this idea of Japanese mastery. And it made you slow down, and it made the tastes were also exquisite because you needed to slow down to eat to try to understand. You couldn't help but try to understand what am I experiencing here? What am I tasting? And then you looked around and it was 1,000 little things I think. Every tiny thing that was occurring was just remarkable, from the angle of the chopsticks to the positioning of the cup. Like, everything had been deeply thought through. It was remarkable, yes.
And for us, it was just an experience that just compounded, overnight. And I mean, it was a small business, right? It was a mid-sized business, but it just epitomizes, what we're really trying to talk about here. I think in this chapter is that we're in the service of getting that applause, right? That we so much want from a profit perspective, but you do that not because you chase the profit, you chase the applause for all those 100 or 1,000 small things that you do well that compound.
That is a great point. Yeah, profit is the applause. All right, so I think that wraps up this episode. Closing reflections, if any, on better customers. Like any closing reflections on better customers as we've discussed today?
My end, Brad, now that we are releasing this new concept, I cannot wait until I go and work on this concept with clients openly. Now they're going to be holding their book and then clearly using each of these flywheels that we've been discussing so far to do much, or at least reflect deeper into what they are doing and how do we actually get it to a better customer flywheel.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, we've always obsessed about helping our folks that we work with think about their core customer and the needs and the benefits that they must derive from doing business with us. For me, that's why I said it's one of my favorite chapters in the book, because it just brings it to life in a way that makes it clear that it's not just a definition, it's about what do you do on a compounding set of activities over a long period of time to build amazing customers that applaud what you do. And I think, I'm super, super excited about this chapter getting read by a lot of our clients and customers.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think it's a valuable conversation. I like the fact that we find opportunities in this book for people who deal with corporations as competitors or as customers to be able to navigate ways to deal with them in a much more meaningful way. So that brings us to the end. I hope you've enjoyed this episode today on better customers. Do tune in next week with us to listen in about better offerings. So we've spoken about better teams. We've spoken about better customers. Next week, we're talking about better offerings. I do hope you can join us then. Well, I hope that you enjoyed the episode. Please be sure to like and to subscribe for future episodes. And of course, this is part of the 7-part series releasing my new book, Bigger Isn't Better, Better is Better. Be sure to join in next week for the next episode.